When the dark falls upon the cityscape, and the last glimpse of sunset vanishes on the buildings, it almost seems like the modern technology have deprived the last bit of mystery from us. Oftentimes we take the world around us for granted, and the planet is just a plain overwritten place. Perhaps only when there is a chance people gaze at the sky and wonder, what have brought us so far? Flipping through the maps of the world is like retrieving the puzzles. Although being amazed by human perseverance, emptiness persists. Hey, maybe there are some realms yet to be conquered by humanity. There are still possibilities beyond the horizon after all. In the 50s and 60s, humans made substantial progress in the exploration of the living planet, especially in Antarctica and space. The south pole of Earth stayed impenetrable. The frozen desert will punish any visitor. Along with the universe, they pushed human technology and determination to an ultimate test. Considering the shelters built by explorers, namely the ice stations and space capsules, they became more alike to one another as time goes on. Now we're talking about the forms and functions, and the meanings too. There are two questions about such a phenomenon. Why do we build living units in those forsaken places at all, and what have mobilized such assimilation? The second one is easier to answer by appropriating the concept of convergent evolution. Two architectural typologies begin to show similar traits as responding to similar evolutional pressures. But we just raise more questions than we've merely answered. To settle the doubts, we owe ourselves a deeper look into the history. Unlike Arctica, which has been the backyard of civilizations for centuries, Antarctica remained mysterious for people until 200 years ago, if we're only taking account of the definitive records of its landform. Understandably, it takes people to sail through the rough seas, survive the dwindling supplies, and ever-growing loneliness. The natural condition mandates that, if not without modern technology of transportation and communication, can human never made it through Antarctica. Russians in 1821 accomplished the first circumnavigation. It later became the foundation for its territorial claim. However, some of the islands they discovered were then taken possession by Norway in 1931. Perhaps to the colonizer's eyes, discovery does not guarantee the right of ownership unless it is followed by continual appearance or activity. Russians finally realized this, but it was too late for them. The exclusion against the Soviet Union from participating in the Antarctica territorial negotiations climaxed in the early Cold War. However, the Korean War made the West, especially the United States, understand that it is practically impossible to ignore the Soviet Union in any global affairs. Confirmed by the Suez Crisis, the global community came upon the conclusion that two emerging giants have just replaced the traditional colonial powers in the international political arena. Due to the terror of nuclear war and mutual firm destruction, the two giants simply had to find a way to get along. Nikita Khrushchev's delivery of peaceful coexistence and abolishment of Stalinism surged turbulence in the East Bloc, but also assured the opening of the International Geophysical Year a few months later. The scientific event realized the collaboration of scientists from different countries. Antarctica was firstly associated with space, given the mutual science interest and its initiation of the space race. The Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik obviously caused ripples of fears on the other side of the Earth. If they can send a satellite into the Earth's orbit, someday that can be a nuclear warhead. As Americans tried to keep up with the Russians' footsteps in the outer space, the two countries finally decided to settle the Antarctic affairs 1 year after. In December 1959, 11 countries signed the Antarctic Treaty. It is still effective today and recognized by 54 countries. The agreement secured Antarctica as an international territory and only peaceful use is to be permitted. Most important of all, the treaty prevented the expansion of the Cold War frontier into Antarctica, even during the most unpredictable time, and that brought us to the Cuba Missile Crisis. The nuclear standoff made it ever clear that the thermonuclear war is more than a possibility. A series of United Nations resolutions were passed to prohibit the deployment of the nuclear weapons in the outer space. Following up, there are principles for activities and conducts in the outer space too. In 1963, outer space joined Antarctica to be the domains of solely peaceful use for all humankind, and yes, the two remain no nuclear zones thereafter. They are designed to be the last resort from the earthly problems. Just like how fictions and folktales used to portray Antarctica, whether it is for dinosaurs or Adolf Hitler. According to the treaty, all research and discoveries made in Antarctica shall be shared freely. Now, why did countries build new stations? It is difficult, but not necessary. Such a free access of research and discoveries do not exist in space according to the current ISS mutual agreements. As an extension of national territory, intellectual rights are shared within a much smaller space club. This made the construction of space station necessary. In 2011, China was legally banned to access the ISS due to American legislations. China has no but only one option, building its own station. We also need to know that space competitions do not overshadow cooperations. Soyuz Apollo experiments proved the technical and political feasibility and paved the way for Mir stations and International Space Station. As of today, the Chinese station and further lunar program are attracting major players like Russia and Europe. Let's look at the environments in Antarctica and space. They're both cold, remote, isolated, and haunted by nearly zero productivity. Given a similar site condition, designers undertook resembling approaches in prefabrication, modular structure, sustainable controlled matters, and many more. Aerodynamics could be a common concern too. Now let's take a closer look at the two examples, Halley 6, the latest British Antarctica station, and the International Space Station. It is without any doubts that neither space nor Antarctica could provide local material for the construction of the station, at least not for explicit equipment and long-term living. Therefore, everything needs to be built back home in the smaller components for transportation. Halley 6 construction was commissioned in the UK and South Africa. The structures and amenities were divided into pieces which, due to the weight limit on the edge of ice shelf, must not exceed 9 tons. On the ISS, components come from many different countries such as the US, Russia, Europe, and Japan. They were built with different objectives and technical specifications, yet the connections in between, namely the docking hatches, are standardized for final assemblage. And they are modularly designed. That means in both cases, the stations are expandable by adding elements. After all, it is quite impossible to launch an entire space station at once. It has to be built from parts to parts. Halley 6 station now has 8 units that covers the function from resting to working. The flows of water, fresh or waste, are carefully coordinated within the technosphere. In space, the ISS manages water in a closed loop. The used water will be treated and purified and finally become drinkable again. Back to Antarctica, Halley 6 employed vacuum drainage and particular shower design to reduce per capita water consumption. It troubles me to understand because they are literally surrounded by water. But according to the architect, designs like these significantly reduce the station's environmental footprint. Interestingly, European Space Agency cooperated with the member states in their Antarctic stations to test the gray water recycling technology, the Melissa project. Although it remains similarly far-fetched to build a Mars colony nowadays, a lot of proposals have illustrated their structures in streamline to reduce the air drag. Mars' atmospheric condition is indeed comparable to Antarctica because of the windiness. Speaking of which, wind tunnels have been used to test the performance of New Zealand's Antarctica station. Learning from the Halley stations, drifting snow is proven to be one of the most threatful hazards to the structure. And aerodynamic shape will considerably relieve maintenance effort, as snow will then bypass the building instead of blocking the openings. Replacing what I said about the snow with sand, you'll get the idea of Mars. But why do we build similar architectures anyway? Why do certain people trouble themselves to go there and be the first?
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Having a lot more to discuss about that speech, such as the utilitarian approach on alien territory and pressures from strategic adversary, the fundamental reason for humans to dedicate formidable efforts to build structures in space and Antarctica is that it opens many possibilities and provides us with solutions to our earthly problems. Science is the main motivation. We want to know more about ourselves. And the answers are hidden in the sky and buried under ice. Antarctica and space are two variants of Earth science. The International Geophysical Year initiated many joint research on Earth phenomena. The hypothesis of continual ocean ridges formed the basis of what is literally called tectonic plate theory. It was also at this time British Halley 1 began to monitor the atmospheric data. In 1985, Halley 4 discovered the ozone hole above the South Pole, justifying the value of the missions and stay. Telecommunication technology was experimented with early rocketry, and now it is inseparable from our day-to-day life. Sensing the pressure from the USSR, Americans also undertook some changes besides declaring their lunar program. The formation of NASA in 1958 was inspired by the Soviet National Space Agency. Progressive ideas such as gender equality flooded the West with the socialism supremacy during the space conventions. It was at this time when national institutions in the US decided to promote women involvement in science and engineering. Despite the similarly progressive tone, history of architecture reveals a different picture, if not the opposite. During the Cold War, a station in these domains is more than a shelter. There are the national sets to demonstrate technological prestige and to pinpoint the country's resolute to stay in the moral and scientific high ground. The architecture were often presented as a political tool for both internal and external applications. Antarctica treaties, although freezing the territorial claims, never withdrew them. It is an awkward reconciliation between the initiating countries and mostly between the ideology against imperialism and growing national material interest within the Red Empire itself. This is no different to the other stakeholders. It was perhaps inspired by the idea that long-term stay and scientific research can be exploited for asserting the practical control. Antarctica architectures are thus poised to transform from a station into a settlement that support a larger crew and longer mission. In fact, not only that British Halley 6 was assembled in the overlapped territory of Argentina and the UK, the shipment of construction team and materials also had a stop at the Falkland Islands. In 1974, O'Neill published his paper about technical feasibility to construct a space colony. He never hesitated to express the desire for vast resources, often sugar-coated by the spirit of enterprise, adventurous, and many other qualities. Frontier means fertile islands, which leads to self-sufficiency and independence. Such a concept is engraved into American cultural inheritance. Science fiction Star Trek sets the Starfleet Academy at San Francisco, the end of the Old West. This is where the students, the future starship commanders, will depart for space, the last frontier, where they will encounter new species and civilizations and boldly go where no man has ever gone before. The Russian situation is very much the opposite in the beginning. Living for space is a way to escape periodic catastrophes. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky is known as the first fictionist who gave a detailed and serious technical discussion of the space station. He reckoned, somehow miraculously, that Earth is doomed to be consumed by the sun, and the only way to survive on a civilizational scale is to escape to space. You can see such an idea is deeply linked with Russian history in the early 20th century, when people's life was constantly disrupted by wars and revolutions. But the newly formed regime favored his work because it is the communist ideal to build the space utopia right here on Earth. Futuristic designs and optimistic sensations can be found so commonly in the 60s architectural genres such as archigram in the UK and metabolism in Japan. Compared to the other architecture movements, the general tune of futurism and optimism remained still in space and Antarctica. Anthropologists argue that people have the inner desire to attach themselves to a group or the construction of monuments to achieve immortality. In either case, something much bigger than oneself. Devoting to something that outlives people is perceived as a continuation of life. As an ordinary person, I often ask myself, how many chance can you be remembered as a part of human history? The space and Antarctica settlements provide just the opportunity. Perhaps satisfying people's psychological demands of being a part of history has such a seductive effect on architectural designs, or could it be the technological advancements allowing the architects and engineers to dream big? Now, what have we learned from the architectures in space Antarctica? Is that they make a great example of convergent evolution? Is that they are the monuments that fulfill our psychological comfort? Or is that we shall approach them as cultural constructs instead of symbol of curiosity because we are essentially babies who hesitate to step outside of cradles unless necessary? For noble reasons or not, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Antarctica and space are never truly at peace, but either anywhere close to wars. Everything happens in there mirrors the outside. They are what we are. As two of the least frequented domains, they are far from being fully tamed, so they pushed us to break the limits, to dream the undreamable, to reach the unreachable, and to live the unlivable.